Hey everybody, welcome to week 11 of IXD. It's hard to believe we're about 2/3 of the way through the course, and it's been really cool to see how y'all have worked through project 1 and have completed project 2, and the things that you've learned and how you've gotten better from a UI design perspective, how you're kind of understanding the overall UX process and the different pieces of the puzzle that work together to tell that full story of UI design, of UX design. And really, crafting a lot of, I think, great portfolio pieces along the way. In this week, we're going to be focusing on building personas and defining the who for our project, for our final project that we'll be doing here in a few weeks. And so let's just start by maybe talking about where we're at in the process. We looked at this in last week's module as part of the overview for project number 3. But just to reiterate, for this project, we're focusing really in this kind of far left, audience, understanding the audience, personas, and UX research. And so while in the first two projects, we've kind of walked through everything from mood boards to IA mapping, all the way through to actual user interface design. Like we've talked about before, we're just layering in some of the different deliverables that a UX designer would be asked to do as part of their day-to-day career, the day-to-day job. And so this is another one of those, building a persona and talking with users. And so it's so important that I've pulled this piece of the final project out to be its own specific project number 3, spending time in this, understanding your audience, building a persona, doing some user research, getting feedback, and setting yourself up for what should be a very well-informed, well-crafted experience there in project number 4. So let's talk about personas a little bit to hopefully help set the stage. And there's a lot of great content within this module by Career Foundry and some other resources that help maybe tell a broader scale and perspective of personas and how to create those. But I just want to hit some of the highlights here for you in this kind of kickoff video for the module. So let's just start with what is a persona. We've talked about the terms UI, UX, and what those mean. And in both cases, the U for UI and UX stand for user interface, user experience design. And so personas really give a face to that user. And so there's a lot of different ways this plays out in the actual persona itself. And I've got a few examples here as we go through some of these bullet points. But think about personas as putting the U in UI UX, the user in UI UX. Personas are a representation typically of your target user or audience types. Very rarely does a product have just one type of user. In my experiences, I've seen products have anywhere from 2 to 5, depending on the type of product it is, maybe upwards of 8 to 10 in a more complex application with wide scale usage and things like that. For this project, we're going to be defining 2 personas, one primary and one secondary persona. And what those are representations of a type of user, a type of audience that would be consuming or using your product or your application. And so at a high level, that's really what personas are. They also serve as a great foundation for research and testing. In my experience, when you start with creating or developing a persona, it's really a hypothesis of who you think might use your product. And in a business world, that's informed by a lot of factors. It's informed by analytics and data. It's informed by business drivers and KPIs or key performance indicators that your business partners or folks in marketing or strategy might help set. In this example, in this project that we're working on, you're going to kind of take a stab at really guessing or creating a hypothesis around who your primary or secondary user might be based off some of the descriptions you've already provided in some of the modules prior as we kicked off project number 3. And the reason why it's great to have personas at a foundational level to kick off the project is because oftentimes when you define that, the further along you get into the design process, you can actually circle back up to folks who fit that persona and ask them questions and have them test your product before it goes live. And so it really helps set a great foundation to go into research, to go into testing and getting some great feedback. Also, too, in my experiences, I've seen personas really help settle arguments across business partners and stakeholders, designers, all alike. I can imagine I've been in a scenario where we might have gotten off track for what the purpose of a product's needs were. The designers had some very strong opinions as to what a product should do or shouldn't do. Business partners had a very strong opinion of what a product should or shouldn't do. And really, we had to have kind of a moment where we all came to the table and said, let's go back and think about our primary personas. Let's watch some videos of how they've used our product. Let's understand what their needs are, what their frustrations are, what their goals are, and kind of reset ourselves to put the user first and not our own needs, our own wants, or our own kind of objective opinions about what a product should or shouldn't do. And finally, they help teams, like I said, maybe as a continuation of that, build empathy and understand product needs from the end user's perspective. We've talked about before how sometimes you as a designer might not be the ultimate end user of your product, or even from a more broad graphic design perspective, might not be the end consumer of your poster or of your pamphlet or brochure or something that you're designing from a print space as well as a digital space. And so having personas up front help you kind of get in that mindset of, okay, this is who I'm designing for. Might not be me. I might be able to bring some expertise to the table, but really I want to try to connect and channel that end user's frustrations, needs, biography, background, the things they deal with in a day-to-day, the other brands that they interact with, and bring all those things into the table so that I can learn from them and build a great product for them in the long run. So you might be asking, what typically is included in a persona? And so kind of at a very foundational level, there are a few things that personas will include. And as you see in the different examples that I've included in this module, they all kind of have this basic foundational level of inclusion of these elements. They also have a few other things as well. We'll talk about that here in a second. They always include a name and a photo. It's important for you not to get too creative in this space from a name and a photo perspective. You want to make these personas as real as possible. So you want to use real people with real names. You can go to an online name generator or something like that, or go to Unsplash and grab a photo that you think is appropriate for that user. But you want to avoid things like using a pet or using a celebrity's name. The reason being, you want to make sure that this feels real. This feels like the real end user that somebody can empathize with, can sympathize with, can learn from, and not kind of have preconceived ideas or notions because you've got a celebrity's face there or a picture of a fluffy cat, also. They often always include demographic information. So basic information like, location, age, maybe their job type or role. They also include a brief bio or a quote that helps us kind of understand kind of a day in the life or a brief overview of that individual and some of the things that they are about in their day-to-day life. It will include goals, usually somewhere around 3 to 5. It'll include frustrations also about 3 to 5. And those relate specifically maybe to your product's the needs that your product is trying to solve. And so in the module just before this, that's due this evening, we're talking about problem statements. And so when you're thinking about your product or thinking about the purpose of your product, based off this persona, what goals might your user have within your product or within the genre of product that you're trying to build, or what frustrations might they have based off previous experiences with a competitor or with similar technology. And they can really range from a variety of different layouts. Here in this example, it's very simple and straightforward. Picture on the left, some basic demographic information, a statement about what he does. And like I said, there's different things you'll see based in the examples that we've got. Some might include kind of these dots to indicate their level of expertise with the internet, social networks, and messengers, or in this example, maybe a more stylized view of a persona, including different motivations and frustrations, personality types, and things like that. Those are kind of hit and miss. Not every persona has that. But if that's something you want to explore, go for it. And I think that would be a cool thing to do. Sometimes those are subjective So I typically tend to avoid, sliding rating scales and things like that. But there's a time and a place for them and for everything. And so I have, just a lot of different examples for you to learn from, to see that there are a variety of different ways people have solved for personas. If you're a very creative person who loves typography, then maybe some of those examples with, the photo with some of the words around the user's profile is something you want to explore. If you're kind of a more straightforward designer that wants to keep it simple and clean, maybe something like this is up your alley too. There's no, wrong way to design a persona as long as it includes some of those foundational elements in the information that's provided. So let's go over this assignment a little bit. So for this assignment, you're going to be creating 2 personas for the product that you'll be designing ultimately for project number 4. These personas are going to serve as that foundation for designing your product to meet the needs of this user type. And so you're going to think about the product and craft the type of users that you believe initially, your hypothesis, will be your primary and secondary audiences for this product. So as far as requirements go, submitting a PDF with 2 pages, your primary and your secondary persona. File name is very simple, like we've been doing before. Project 3 _ personas _ your initials, and your dimension should be that 1920 by 1068 wide, because ultimately we're going to put this back in the project number 3 final package, which is going to be that same size as we've done throughout the first 2 projects. So we'll just keep it simple and design your personas within that 1920 by 1028, 1 primary and 1 secondary persona. Let's go over some of the details about these requirements. So first thing you want to do, like we've said, is build out a primary and a secondary persona. Your primary persona should describe the main user of your product, and your secondary persona should be different enough that it from your primary persona to represent another segment of users for your product. And let me just kind of at a high level show you what I mean by that. So let's think about Spotify. Perhaps Spotify's main primary demographic is somebody like Melanie. She's 35 years old. She's an account manager. She's a passive listener. She might have playlists that she likes or that's auto-generated by Spotify playing in the background as she does her day-to-day. She might leverage Spotify to favorite some podcasts or some playlists that she can quickly grab and go to. But for all intents and purposes, she's not a super user in the sense that she's building her own playlist with customized content. She's more of a passive listener that kind of has Spotify on in the background and not kind of tailoring it to meet her needs. She's kind of letting the product do that for her. So maybe that's the primary user. A secondary user for Spotify might be somebody like Jaron, who's 26 years old in quality assurance, who is that content curator who takes his music seriously, doesn't want anything necessarily that's suggested or recommended or auto-generated, and tailors that music to fit his moods, to fit what he's working on. Maybe perhaps he creates his own playlist and an album cover, and shares that and builds content for a community. That's somebody who might be a super user of Spotify. So that's what I mean when I mean that the types of personas should be different enough that you can define kind of your primary user group and then a secondary user group. And that's going to have a variety of different ways, shapes, and forms. In this example, maybe for Spotify, the primary user group is somebody who's kind of a passive listener, and the secondary user group is somebody who's more kind of into the weeds, content curator who takes things a little bit more seriously and kind of uses the tool to its fullest advantage. The second thing, as far as requirements go, is your persona should include at minimum the following: the name and photo, like we've talked about, demographic information like age, location, job role, or any additional demographic information that would be pertinent to your products. That might be education level or something like that. A quote and a brief bio. So just at a high level, help us understand who this user is. Typically that's 2 to 3 sentences max. We're not talking about paragraphs of biography. But in this, in these examples, you're being creative about imagining who this user might be and bringing them to life for us. You're really telling the story of who your users are within your product. You want to include goals and frustrations, 3 minimum for each. And then finally, check out those examples of the personas and add any additional kind of elements based off that inspiration that you feel are applicable to your users of your product. Your personas can be as creative and on brand as you desire for your product. You're going to submit your personas in a readable format that follow the instructions that we've got outlined here. In a PDF format with your groups, along with 200 to 300 words explaining the thinking behind your personas for your product as you visualize them in this exercise. And finally, post number 2, due 3/28, 11:59 p.m. is that peer review. Make sure you hit that. Make sure you do it on time. The 200-word evaluation of your team members within your group about what you feel is working well, might need attention, might be a little more detail or less detail for those personas. So once again, to go over the requirements, the assignments, the due dates, post number 1 due Thursday, March 25th at 11:59 p.m. and our second post due Sunday, March 28th at 11:59 p.m. You're going to be submitting 2 personas, a primary and a secondary persona that meet some of those minimum requirements. Definitely push beyond that. But to meet, make sure you include those minimum requirements. Remember, no work that's submitted or edited after that deadline is going to result in a 0, won't be accepted. Appreciate folks who have strived to hit those deadlines just to make sure that we're keeping on track and keeping pace with the course. And excited to see what y'all do for your personas, what might be your first personas. And again, keep in mind that, personas might be intimidating to start with. You're trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, but be imaginative, be creative. Think about who your target audience might be, that secondary audience, and have fun with it. Personas go a long way to kind of telling the story and setting the stage for your product, and will ultimately help you craft the decisions that you make along the way. And it all starts foundationally here with your problem statement, followed by your personas, and then some of the research that we'll do here in the next week or so. So looking forward to seeing what y'all do for your personas and what you submit here on Thursday night. Hopefully this was helpful as an overview. Make sure you watch all the great content we have included for you below, and can't wait to see what you do. All right, thanks everybody. See you.